G'day guys, how you doing? Live on YouTube, and we've got a presentation of mine called The Formula of Interesting. Now, those of you that just received the email got a little bit of the background story whereby, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago, I wondered if there was a formula or some common elements to award-winning photography. So I set up a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and I wrote down a whole bunch of different photography elements: great light, simplicity, whether or not saturated color or desaturated color was prominent. And I went back through and calculated all of those, and it turns out there was a particularly strong formula within a number of those elements in award-winning photography. So that's what this presentation is about. It's about those formulas or those common elements in award-winning photography, forming what I call the formula of interesting. So let's go ahead and start the presentation. Hopefully everyone can hear me. We've got a couple of viewers online, 30 odd. Oh, before I start, something cool. Log in via YouTube. So if you're currently watching at australianphotographer.com at the embedded link on my website page, you can click the YouTube link below that, or click the YouTube icon in the bottom right corner and go and sign in to your YouTube account, and you'll be able to use the live chat and ask me questions. I've got my mobile phone set up down the bottom here with the live chat on, so that will send me a notification when you guys ask a question. Don't make them too difficult. Keep it clean. But have a good laugh anyway. Yeah, ask me some questions, see how we go. We'll have a laugh, and well, with any luck, maybe there'll be one or two little gems of information in here to help you create more interesting photography, and maybe maybe win the odd photo competition or two, which would be cool. All right, let's jump into the formula of interesting photography. Let me just share. Hopefully this works. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, give me a second. With any luck, hopefully that will start sharing. How are we going there? It's not coming through yet. 1 second. Here we go. All right, beautiful. Okay, sorry about that delay. I was just making sure that the presentation was going to show up. So you don't have to look at my big old noggin on your screen anymore. It's just going to be a straight up presentation and my voice. So if you had trouble sleeping lately, listen along, and I'm sure we can solve that sleeping issues with any luck. Now, hopefully I'm not that boring, but anyway, let's get into the formula of interesting images. Okay. All right, so a little bit about me first of all. I mean, a lot of you are from easywayphotography.com.au, my education online website. But those of you that don't know a lot about me, my background, I'm a residential builder, or at least was a residential builder by trade for the first 15 odd years of my professional life. I didn't really like it. I can't remember too many days, like a handful of days, when I really enjoyed and wanted to go to work. So I decided something needed to change, and I decided that might as well be photography. Back in around about, the dream started back in around about the year 2000, and yeah, early 2000s anyway. You know, picked up the hobby like so many of you guys out there have, and then just kept on keeping on at it, and decided to turn professional about 2 or 3 years ago now. My professional life is made up of photography education. So as I said, I've got the online website, easywayphotography.com.au. I also do live presentations at the RSL clubs in Sydney, DYRSL, mainly for the focus group. If you haven't heard of Focus Photography on Facebook, jump on there and check out Focus Seascape and Landscape Photography. Incredible amateur photography group. While you're on Facebook, look up Easy Way Photography on Facebook also. Awards, look, we don't need to talk about my awards. If you're really interested in some of the awards I've been lucky enough to achieve, jump over and check out my website at australianphotographer.com, and you'll be able to find out all about that. Moving on, as I said, online photography education is my thing. Live group workshops, mentioned that as well. I also do one-on-one workshops and custom group workshops. So if you've got yourself and 2 or 3 friends and you want to maybe host a workshop at your place or at your office, give me a call and we can sort something out. Moving along, let's get into the good stuff. Okay, before we do, this is the kind of thing that I like to teach people to do. This is one of my very ordinary raw files. And this is obviously the before shot. And this would be the after. Okay, so before, after. This is the kind of thing I like to teach people to do at easywayphotography.com.au. Here's another raw file. And another finished file there. And one more, I think. There's another raw, very flat. I mean, you would be well within your rights to delete that file. And you know, throw that to the trash can, but look what a little bit of Photoshop editing can bring out. Okay, that is the same photo. You wouldn't think so, would you? Not much there. Look at all that detail with a bit of contrast and curves adjustments there. Okay, this is what we came here for. The formula of interesting images. As I said, it was something that I stumbled across because I'm a bit of a geek, and I'm sure I would have failed. I would have done miserably in a photo competition. That happens reasonably regularly. I just don't tell everyone about it when that happens generally. But I would have failed terribly, and I would have been determined to improve. And I remember going through about 4 or 5 photography competitions. Better Photography was one of them. The Loop Awards, which is no longer around, was another. Maybe the Focus Awards was the other one I went through. And I basically, as I said, I had a spreadsheet with about 15, 10 or maybe 10 categories. As I said, great light, simplicity, subject was another big one. Story, maybe black and white might have been in there, saturated color, all these kind of elements. And I went through and ticked them off as I went through each image, and then collated them together and came up with some percentages, which this is basically based upon. Okay, so all the images in this presentation are mine unless they're otherwise noted. Okay, so yeah, they're all mine at this stage. In the next series of the formula of interesting images, in the part 2, I use some of my idols images. Moving along, the formula. Okay, so a lot of you know the origins of photography. The word in, I believe it might be ancient Greek, means phos for light and graphy for drawing. So drawing with light. And the reason I like to bring that up is you'll notice as the second item on the list there, or in the formula. So this is the formula. Light, story, subject, simple. Okay, pretty straightforward formula. And you're probably all kind of looking at me or listening to me thinking, well, that's completely obvious. But I'm going to make it even more obvious to the point that we really try and add as many of these criteria into our images when we go out and take photos, because it truly makes stronger images, I believe. And I'm going to try and reinforce that over the next half hour, 40 minutes. Now, getting back to where I was, which was the definition being drawing with light, or light drawing, if you like. Story, you know, telling stories with light is essentially what we're trying to do as photographers. And the storytelling ability is, you know, rather than taking photos, we should be trying to, you know, capture stories or create stories in our work. Keep in mind also, as we scroll through, that you can fire questions at me. There's a whole bunch of people saying hey and hi, g'day, how you doing? Good to have you aboard. Let's roll on through. So light, story, subject, and simplicity. Let's look at those closer. Light. Okay, so This is light, and these are some of the things that we'll look at a little bit closer. So what is great light? We'll take a look at the master painters and how they can maybe influence us or inspire us with their use of light or their creation of great light. Light's made up of two things, light and shadow. There is no great light without shadows. So remember that too. And there, well, shadows tell the story of the light. Here's point 4 there. And great light tends to create volume and that three-dimensionality that we're all trying to portray in our landscape photography. So let's look at some of those a little closer. Oh, here's a cool example actually. Something that I never really gave much thought to until reasonably recently, maybe a couple of years ago, is the difference between great light and great color. Okay, so quite often we see a crazy colorful sky and we all run around saying, oh, wasn't that great light? Well, the thing is that often great color doesn't equal great light. And here's an example here. This image here is what I would consider, it's just a raw file, so it hasn't been pushed in Photoshop just yet. But this is what I would consider, you know, reasonable color or great color, at least in the time frame of when great color would occur. So great color occurs when the sun is generally below the horizon, okay? That's when great color occurs. But you don't get much light in the foreground. See how the foreground's rather flat? You know, there's not all that much definition. There's not a lot of that three-dimensionality to the foreground. But if we scroll on to the next image, which actually was taken about 10 or 15 minutes prior to this one, so this is at sunset, and this is when the sun was down, and the next image here, which I consider to be great light, was taken about 10 minutes prior. And now you can see this, there's not a lot of color in the sky. Okay, there's a little bit of kind of highlights in the clouds there. But look at that gorgeous golden light bathing the subject there. And that's what I consider to be great light. That beautiful golden light flooding across the subject. If we go backwards, can you see the difference? Great color, great light. Color, light. Flat subject, great light on the subject. And that's what makes great light, is that light coming in from the side generally, and then having that kind of interplay between light, shade, light, shade, light, shade. Now, if the sun was right behind my back, directly behind my back, the entire scene would be rather flat again. It'd all be lit up, but it would be a little bit flat because there wouldn't be any shadows to give it that three-dimensional feel. See the shadows down the left edge of the structure, and some of those other elements are casting shadows as well. So we know that they're prominent and pushing forward, giving it that three-dimensional feel and the volume to the subject, which is important, and that's what great light does. So try and capture that great light. Have the sun, try and have the sun coming in and hitting you on the right or left shoulder is generally a good idea. Moving on. Okay, check this out. This is better than any of my images tonight. That's for sure. Albert Bierstadt, one of my current huge inspirations. As many of you know, I've been hugely inspired by, just quickly before we go on to that, a quick question here from Terry. He asks, if you're logged into the YouTube chat, he asks, would you combine both photographs to bring out great light and great color? Absolutely. I have an example image where I did that actually. I didn't show it there, but definitely, if you're really keen on great color in the sky and you really want great light on the foreground, hang around, shoot both, and blend them together. Beautiful, looks stunning. Okay, so back to Albert Bierstadt and the romantic painters of the mid-1800s, essentially, I believe. Huge inspiration for me over the last 12 months. I've been raving on about them. I've been trying to emulate their style somewhat. If you notice that recent image of mine, the grand waterfall scene, the black and white, it was hugely inspired by Albert Bierstadt himself, and I think you can see that kind of layering and compositional elements, and hopefully that little bit of light elements that that Albert's got here that I tried to incorporate, and definitely that drama and mood and atmosphere and all that good stuff. But look at the way, why I like to revert back to the romantic painters, or one of the reasons being is from an educational point of view, is all artists, they start with a blank canvas essentially, and then they're creating this atmosphere and texture and light and all of this mood and emotive nature, and they're doing it from a blank canvas with fairly primitive tools, really, when you think about it. Various types of brushes and whatnot, but they're not using any fancy luminosity masks or anything like that. And essentially, we're starting off, and this is one of the reasons I like to shoot in overcast conditions quite often, is because I get a nice flat light, and then I can go into the scene and begin painting in the directional light where I want it to come from. Okay, so that's definitely something to think about, is that we get a head start. We've got all the textures and all the details already there, and then we have the opportunity to paint in the great light if we choose so. Okay, so there's no reason why we can't create this type of atmosphere in our photography, and that's certainly something that I've been chasing later. But as far as great light is concerned, again, look at the way the shadows and the light are interplaying, and that's what I really wanted to highlight. You've got that light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, as the shadows are creating, well, the shadows and the light are creating that volume throughout the image. Pretty spectacular stuff. So go and Google image Albert Bierstadt, or even the romantic landscape painters, and you'll see some pretty inspiring stuff. Moving on. Okay, my image kind of pales into insignificance against Albert's work. But anyway, we can only try. So great light. Just highlighting. This is a composite image of the southern peninsula of the Tasmanian coast, and it's a composite. A lot of the light was already there. The scene was shot, or the main scene, the island or the peninsula, was shot at roughly about 10 or 10:30 in the morning, something like that. The clouds have been dropped in. They were from Iceland. The crop, it's been a bit cropped in here. The rainbow on the left's got a little more breathing room in the actual composition. And yeah, I mean, it's, you just line up all those elements. But again, we're talking about great light. I would consider this to be pretty spectacular light. And again, it's all about the way that the light is coming in from the right-hand side there, and kind of striking the right faces of the rock faces here, and then folding into shadow, then back into light, then back into shadow, and back into light. And that is really, I mean, that is great light. It's nothing, we get some, you get some really mystical kind of light with fog and that kind of stuff sometimes, but essentially what we're looking for is that close relationship of light and shadow. That equals great light, in my opinion. Okay, so keep your eye out for that. And it happens, it happens every location, pretty much every morning, as long as it's not completely cloud cover. You just have to position yourself to capture it in against the subject, to give your subject that side-lit, three-dimensional feel. Okay, so that was light. Light was our first formula, or first element, common element within award-winning photography or interesting photography. The second one is story, which is a little bit harder to kind of put your finger on or explain what it's all about. It means kind of a motive, something that grabs you and makes you feel something. These are the type of images that generally do well in competitions, and these are the type of images that I'm generally trying to create, is an image that will make you feel something, or at least makes me feel something. And then there's half a chance that if you pick up on the visual clues that I've left in there, kind of from myself, if you like, that you might pick up those clues and create your own story from a rather, relatively simple image and simple clues that I've left there. Now, just quickly before we move into story, I mentioned that I collated all of these into a spreadsheet, and these 4 elements, so it was light, story, what was the other one? Subject and simplicity. Those 4 elements all rated above 80% within those 3 or 4 competitions, top 50 images that I went through. Okay, so 80% they had, or all of those they had. So 80% contained subject, 80% contains good, strong story, 80% contained great light, and 80% or more I considered to be simplistic in nature. Okay, so 4 out of 5 images. Now, not a lot of them contained all 4, and just because an image contains all 4 doesn't mean it's any better than one that contains 3 or 2 or 1 necessarily, or none for that matter. But in saying that, there seems to be a fairly strong pattern to suggest that including at least 2 or 3, or at least considering including at least 2 or 3 of these elements, is going to make your images potentially more interesting and potentially stronger chance of being an award-winning photograph. Okay, so don't scream and shout if it doesn't work, but give it some thought. Go and check out some of these competitions. Go and check out the results of the Focus Awards from last year. The Better Photography Awards are coming up. Go and check out the results from last year, and obviously hang around with me for a little bit longer. But have a look against this formula, against those 4 elements, and you can count them for yourself, and I'm sure you'll come to the same conclusion. Okay, so story. Again, we're going to take a closer look, but we want to be considerate, at least consider our story. It's really good, or often much more emotive style image if you tell your own stories, because you're much more connected to those. And we're going to talk about the emotive nature a little bit as well, if we can. Okay, so let's move on. I'm not sure, maybe do I touch on this image again? But as we scroll through these next 3 or 4 images, see if you can, before I tell you what the story is, see if you can kind of figure out for yourself maybe what the images might be portraying, if you like. Who have we got here? We got Two Stop Images has asked, do you have a story in mind before you shoot, or do you create the story with the available conditions? I think I'm going to touch on that in a second, actually. In fact, it might be the next slide. So let's move on. It is. So stay tuned for this slide here, because this answers that exact question. So there's 2 forms. There's probably more, but the 2 forms that I can think of right at this moment, or when I wrote this presentation. Pre-visualizing, which means having a story in mind before you get to the location, which this image here is an excellent example. So I'll come back and tell you what this image is about, but have a look and see if you can try and imagine what that might be about, and I'll see if I've left enough clues there for you to read that story. And then the second one is being in the moment, or kind of telling the story because of the conditions, or because of the place or the location. So telling the story about the location or about the place. So I do a little less of that than I do kind of the pre-visualized stuff. And even if I haven't pre-visualized, I still, well, there's a third one, in which case when you're sort of capturing the bones of the image, the structure of the image, so the subject and the composition and whatnot, and then you come back and you might sit on that image for a week or a month or even longer, a year, until you get the inspiration to weave the emotion through that. Now, often that will be, for me, it can be, or often is, my emotional or mental state at the time. So a lot of my images are based on my experience with anxiety and depression, which I know a lot of people out there also experience the same. So I feel for you in that. I know how tough it can be at times. But you know, I've been in the dark times, and I know that, you know, they always kind of clear for better days. And actually, one of my series is called, oh, now it's jumped my mind. What's it called? even in the darkest days. Well, there's a series of mine with about 8 or 10 images called Even the Darkest Days. And it's a really dark, grungy kind of image, quite heavy image with a flash of light, which is the suggestion that there's a clear day coming. And that entire series is inspired by those darker days clearing for brighter days. Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. Although it can feel like that sometimes. Now, pre-visualize in the moment, and then that third one where you capture the image without really knowing where you want to take it. Now, the story of this image, see how many of you jumped on and grabbed that story. This is one that I pre-visualized before I went to Iceland. And I don't know, what's that? What are you talking about, Aaron? I can't quite understand that comment. This one was one that I pre-visualized before I went to Iceland. I knew I was going to go to the ice beach, and there was going to be some beautiful crystal ice there. Sounds like a drug problem, but no. You know, the ice crystals on the beach. This is one of those there. And I sat on that for a long time thinking, how am I going to put a spin on it? Something completely different to what we always see. Now, it's one of the most beautiful locations to photograph in the world, is the ice beach in Iceland there. Can't think of the exact name of it right now, but you know the one I'm talking about. Black Pebble Beach with these beautiful icebergs all washed up, and pretty wild stormy weather out there quite often. So I pre-visualized this, and this is my image. This image is inspired by global warming. So you've got these smoke stacks from a coal refinery down in Wollongong. And then I took my gloves off, rolled my sleeves up, and Ignacio was kind enough to capture the image for me because I really wanted it to be my hands. I wanted it to be my statement for global warming and climate change. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, this is what it is. And it's about, the image goes a little deeper than that for me. It's not only about the, you know, the industrial kind of effect on the melting of the ice, but it's also the, you know, the man's hands and his contribution in, you know, physically melting that ice. You know, not literally physically melting the ice by getting up there with a blowtorch, but you know what I mean. Like, my connection with that cold ice is causing that beautiful ice crystal to ever so slowly melt. So there's a beautiful, well, I believe there's a beautiful metaphor, kind of a poetic image there, if you like. Let's roll on. I don't even know what the next slide is. Here we go. So, you know, while we're on the subject of trying to figure out what these images are all about, maybe ponder what this image could be. The looks like the web's not doing this image any favors here with a little bit of banding. The noise is supposed to be in there, but there's a little bit of banding there as well. Yeah, funny you should say that, Callan. Show the iceberg dripping. There is a tiny drip on that iceberg, but you need to see the image up a little bit closer. I didn't want it to be overly obvious, but yeah, there is a couple of drips dripping off that iceberg. So the story, and tell your story. And the reason you want to tell your story, I mean, you don't have to. You can tell the story of the location, and that's cool. You can keep it completely realistic. I guess this is about what I do, and if you you know, if you want to get into that more emotive style of photography, it's important to tell your own story for a couple of reasons. Number one, you know, if you know your own story, then you're a much better chance of being able to tell that story clearly to somebody else. You know, we only have potentially one image or a series of images to tell these stories, and for me, you know, photography right at the heart of it, we shouldn't need words to be able to communicate what the story is, or at least we should attempt to tell the story without words, I believe. Similar to the way that I'm allowing you guys to try and decipher or read the image before I tell you what it's about. So tell your stories. They're the strongest stories. As I said, you know, I tell my stories based on what I'm feeling, what annoys me, with the global warming, what I'm passionate about, these kind of things. So yeah, definitely try and tell your own stories, and I think it'll make more powerful stories in the end, more powerful images. And if you can manage to connect with a judge on an emotional level, if we're talking about award-winning photography, if you can connect with a judge emotively, there's a huge chance that that image is going to score well. Now, this particular image, this is quite a dark image actually for me. It's one of my favorites, which is an interesting one because it represents being created in one of the darkest times. I mentioned my depression, and I don't bang on about it, but this was one of the darkest times that I had, and it's interesting that it would be one of my favorite images now. I think it's because it portrays for me, portrays the story really well. You can see the blurry foreground, and actually the blurry foreground was marked down in competition because the judges didn't understand why it was there. And the reason it is there, and it doesn't make sense photographically, of course, because the trees closer to the lens are completely in focus and the house is in focus. But the midground is out of focus. But that out of focus to me represents that kind of instability, that insecurity, self-insecurity that I would have been feeling at the time. The point of view from the photograph, even though it's a complete composite, the point of view from peering behind the trees, is kind of, it's kind of that creepy thing, feeling like a bit of a weirdo, a bit of a creep, bit of a dark kind of person, this kind of stuff, and I think probably those that have had anxiety and depression can probably I guess understand what I'm talking about, feeling like, just feeling dark and a bit creepy and a bit strange about the whole thing, when you're in those dark days. So that's what that's about. And then you've got this lonely old little yellow house sitting out there all by itself. And the house has got this interesting energy. The house is from Norway. As soon as I saw the house, I knew I had to take a photograph of it. It kind of just felt eerie and strange and weird and interesting. And, from a composite photographer's point of view, if you see anything interesting and weird or whatever that grabs your attention, you just take a shot of it, even full frame, just get all those pixels, put them aside, and then, that's where we make our images from. So I was inspired to make this image initially from the house because it was kind of creepy and weird and awkward. And that reminded me of kind of what I was feeling at the time. So I used this image was created, and I used the creative process of this image to, bring me out of those dark days for sure. Aaron asks, I wonder if we could see this image pre-edit. Yeah, mate, we can probably do that. I think it's floating around somewhere on Facebook land, but essentially it's not all that interesting. There's one image which is the house in the foreground. There's no ice in the foreground. The foreground kind of looks like ice to me, but it's actually not. It's snow in the original image. And there's another two images being the tree here. That tree that's forming the framing is actually the same tree cut in half and then split to opposite sides of the frame. Now I say that, it probably makes great sense. Yeah, the other cool thing I like about this image is the way that there's another little kind of poetic element, the way the trees are reaching out and almost touching each other. Okay, so it's all these little clues that I try and place in there that you can place in so the story gets read. So the trees are kind of reaching out, almost touching each other, but not quite. Okay, so I think that kind of, that poetic element of reaching out for help or whatnot might be there too. Yeah, cheers, Aaron. So Aaron just said, to see the creative journey and the mood and feeling, I guess, that drove you to creative is interesting. Question from Stephen, do you spend many hours, days honing an image to make it right as a particular statement, or do you churn through in a day? Well, it varies. The majority of the hard work or the work is done in a matter of an hour or two, and then I'll sit on the image for, anywhere up to 6 months and just tweak it, maybe 5-10 minutes every couple of days and bring it here, bring it there, try something, and then compare it to, you know, before, after. Is that a better or worse version of what it was before? And the other thing I'll often do is I'll often scrap the entire edit, even after a couple of hours work, and start again. I'll do that quite regularly too. So some of these images can be on version 3 or 4 before I get the feel I'm looking for. Yeah, one branch touching the house. I kind of wanted to keep that realistic too. So Ben's written, I love how there's one branch touching the house. And I did want that one branch kind of just touching. I felt it wasn't going to be, you know, overly realistic if all the branches were kind of perfectly framing the house at the same distance. Yeah, okay, so let's move along. Still on the story, so a motive, and what I want to talk about here is some of the elements that can help you, or how can you drop clues into your image to try and tell the story. And a couple of things are coming to mind. Color is the big one. So I mean, when we're looking at, you know, when we scroll all the way back to Albert Bierstadt, he's essentially using the same elements, you know, artistic elements as what we've got at our disposal as photographers. So we've only really got 4 elements to use to create our story, and that is light, so lighter or darker, contrast, more or less contrast, color, more or less saturation, and detail, sharper or blurry, less sharp. Okay, so they're the things that we have. Now, color is probably one of the biggest influences on emotion and mood, and we know that, you know, we've learned that from early on. I remember at school, the teachers telling us that, you know, cool colors, you know, make you sad, and warm colors make you warm and fuzzy, and you know, some of the yellows and the reds, you know, make you happy, and this kind of thing, you know. So that, you know, we know that colors do that. Now, one of the interesting things, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in part 2 of this presentation, which I'll do in a couple of weeks or 2-3 weeks time, where we're going to look at the building blocks of interesting and really get into some more elements of interesting photography. But what I wanted to point out, that one of the ways I study color a little bit is to go to Google image search and Google image movie posters. Okay, so Google image movie posters, and you can, like, a classic example is type in Google image search love movie poster or romantic movie poster, and the whole screen will be filled up with reds, yellows, and pinks, pretty much. That'll be the whole screen. If you maybe don't do it tonight because you might get nightmares, but type in horror movie and you'll see a whole bunch of reds and blacks, like blood reds and blacks, and that eerie lime green, because that eerie lime green, you know, that kind of night vision green, think of Blair Witch Project, that eerie weird green. If we even scroll back to this image, where do you think that eerie green inspiration came from? That eerie kind of horror movie feel makes us uneasy, okay? You know, the movie guys, the producers, have been using these colors for years, and it's kind of ingrained. We know that green associates us with unease. We're about to get scared. So yeah, keep that in mind. So yeah, do some research on colors, look at movie posters and how they portray, because movie posters are an excellent example of someone being paid millions of dollars to tell a story with one single image and maybe a word or 2. Okay, excellent example of that. Couple of questions here. Do you find it hard to abandon an image if you've been tweaking it for months? No, not really. I kind of just, it feels refreshing. I know that I've pushed too hard or too far and it's gone out of control. And, you know, I might not delete it straight away, but I'll just go straight back to the raw file. I'll create a version 2 and I'll start again. So thanks for that question, Grant. And then we got my mate Ricardo de Cunha listening on. Good on you, big fella. Love your work. In my opinion, this is one of the finest images ever produced. Oh, turn it up, mate. You're killing me. Oh, thank you, Ricardo. You're a bloody champion. I appreciate that feedback, but I didn't pre-read that question, so you've embarrassed me a little bit there. The story. Again, so we're talking about colors. So the other couple of things, you've got light. So you can make, obviously darker with a flash of light on the subject can portray that darker mood. So darker edges and a lighter subject. So you don't want the whole image to be particularly dark. I've got an image in mind at the moment, just completely conceptual. I've got one element of it, and it's going to be probably my darkest image yet, as far as tonality is concerned. Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm champing at the bit, kind of wanting to get out and shoot the rest of the elements to get involved in that one. And then you've got, so that was brightness, and you've got tonality, okay? So tonality also affects mood a little bit, levels of contrast throughout the image. You'll notice around the outside of this image, not a lot of contrast in the image. In the outsides, a lot of contrast in the middle, and that can also help. And the last one, I don't use blur a lot, but there's some incredibly emotive photographers that are using blur. In fact, Grant Galbraith, who asked the previous question before, Ricardo, if you can find his work on Facebook or potentially Instagram, chuck up your Instagram handle there, Grant, if you like, and the guys can check it out. But he's done some great blurry kind of multiple exposure stuff, which is really quite emotive. So yeah, that's using blur in your advantage to tell the story. Shall we move on? Oh, this image. Again, I hate to harp on the same thing. A lot of my images are based on the same subject, being dark days of depression and anxiety, as I said. And this was the first in a series of Even the Darkest Days. So this image is actually called Even the Darkest Days, or Even in the Darkest Days. And this is the very first series that spawned that, sorry, the very first photograph that spawned that series. It took a while for me to get to this particular edit. I remember editing it the first time around, and I thought, wow, this is looking really good. And if I look back at that edit now, it looks absolutely horrendous. But I ended up entering the original edit in my first ever New South Wales APPA Awards, and it did okay. I think it got a silver, like 83, 84, which is excellent. I wasn't blown away, and then I stumbled across what was his name? Oh, I can't think of the photographer now. Andy, I'll get back to you on that one. Really dark photographer, and even the work of Grant Galbraith, actually, he had some really dark stuff at the time too. And I thought, I really want to take this image to somewhere really dark and grungy, and I sat on it and reprocessed over a number of months, and then I ended up putting it back into the Australian National Print Awards, and it did much better. I think I got 88 silver distinction, which I was very happy with. And then I ended up putting it in the Focus Awards, and it won the overall Image of the Year in Focus in, I think, 2014. So that was the beginning of that kind of dark and grungy stage. I didn't really need that, I didn't need it to be an award-winning image. I kind of knew that was the direction that I was heading. And then just recently finding those romantic artists, I then, really have taken that down a whole nother path completely, because I really know where my direction is now. And once you know your direction, oh my God, like creating work and ideas just keeps coming from every direction. So, put some effort in and try and find your vision and direction, because it really pays back in the long run. And I spent 5 or so years trying to find mine. And look, just before the breakthrough, I was completely lost and didn't even know which direction I was heading. And then all of a sudden, Peter Eastway mentioned, some of his inspiration, and I was like, wow, those guys are incredible. And I went and researched a bit more about the romantic artists and found some of my own guys that I was really inspired by, and it went from there. Moving on. Okay, so subject. So of this four-part formula, if you like. Subject is by far, in my opinion, well, light's very, very important, obviously, but excuse me, but subject is probably the most important. And if you flick through, when I discovered the importance of subject, you know, now I just try and include a strong subject, something to anchor my photo in every composition. And if you take a look at my portfolio, there's a couple of abstract images in there, but most of the kind of, you know, standard compositions, landscape style compositions, even though they're not usually based on reality, generally have, I would say, a huge percentage, 95%, will have a really strong subject. And so we're going to take a look and reinforce why having a really strong subject is super important in your photography. So let's jump in there. I don't have the time. What time is it? Anyway, I hope I'm not boring you guys too much. Stick with me. We're about probably half, three-quarters of the way through, so we'll get there. Okay, so we're back on this image. There's a couple of doubles up. I apologize for that. I don't have enough images to fill up all the pages as yet, so I probably do, but I wanted them to really be my better work and the work that I'm really passionate about at the moment. So there is one or two doubles throughout here. So subject, yes, number one, it makes things more interesting, in my opinion, having a strong subject. By having the subject, and the reason it makes it more interesting, I think, is because it, you know, it simplifies things. It gives you, you're taking a photo of something. It allows you to highlight the subject through processing. You know, this image here, for example, you can see the light and the contrast is highlighting the subject, and the surrounds are kind of dull and you know, they're purposefully dull because those elements are not overly interesting. There's enough detail in there to keep you interested. I like the kind of, the gnarly kind of, feels like black burnt coal in the foreground, and the clouds are kind of mirroring that same effect. But just by having a subject makes, you know, your viewers can identify with that really quickly, and it makes the image more interesting. I definitely believe that. And I picked up on this back when I was traveling around Australia back in 2012. Had another shocker in a photo competition. This was before I went and got the spreadsheets out. Had another shocker in a photo comp, as you do. And I decided, you know, every time I go poorly in a photo competition, I get out there and I study and I try and improve my work, and you know, try and do better next time. And what I ended up doing was, I had a few photographers that I was really inspired by at the time: Peter Eastway, Christian Fletcher, Tony Hewitt. There would have been a couple more. I can't think of them right now. But what I did was I went and studied the websites day in, day out, and just pulling apart their images into their elements, you know. And I discovered things like, out of those photographers, in particular Christian Fletcher, you know, really dominant. Well, at the time, might not be the same case now. This was 5 or 6 years ago, but at the time, I felt that the majority of his images portrayed side light. Okay, which I went on to find out to be, or my definition of great light is very closely linked to side light. So Christian had a lot of images that were side lit, and I thought, okay, well, being a big fan of Christian's work, I might start trying to capture my images with the sun coming in from the side rather than shooting straight at the sun. And then I went on to study Peter Eastway's work, and this is where I'm coming to with the subject. And I found that the majority of Peter Eastway's work, I could identify a strong element in the image, or a strong subject that was anchoring the image. Okay, so I've definitely stolen a couple of traits from my favorite photographers, and that's completely okay. You know, mix and match. You know, if you like the side light, bring that on board into your work. If you like including a subject, bring that on board. Just bring on board, you know, the elements that attract you, and make up your own style that way. You don't necessarily have to copy someone's images and styles, but break it down and see if you can figure out what it is you like about those styles, and then just bring in and mix and match the stuff that suits you. Let's move on to the next. The subject is relatable. This sounds like a strange one. This is an image I took last weekend. It probably hasn't sat long enough and probably could do with a little bit more refinement, which I'm going to do in the next day or two, because I'm about to do a print of this image, or at least print a couple of them off for the clients that were away with me at the Crescent Head workshop for this weekend. So we had some wild conditions. The swell was enormous. It was raining. The mist was coming off the ocean, the sea spray. It was incredibly difficult, but incredibly dramatic. And enough about the image. The reason I've included it as the example image here, potentially, is that having a subject being the headland there with the light on it, the beautiful sunlight, you can almost relate to it by, you know, you can kind of feel, you kind of know what that headland feels like, what it feels like to be standing or in position of that headland. You can feel the sunlight coming through and warming you up a little bit. You know, it feels maybe cold. There's a bit of mist and sea spray blowing around. There's rain coming in. There's dark clouds, but you can feel a little bit of that warmth from the sun. And that's where the subject can help you tell very human stories. Is you know, well, you can tell human stories by using a subject, and your viewers, well, at least this is what I think. I mean, I haven't done a survey on anything. I might have to get out the spreadsheet and get some people to fill it in for me. But I'm kind of joking. Sounds like a reasonable idea. But you can kind of, I kind of feel like by including that subject that people can place themselves in the position of that subject and really get a feeling of what it feels like to be that subject. Okay, so it sounds like a kind of a strange scenario, but yeah, definitely I feel like including a subject helps the image become relatable to some human emotions, if you like. Okay, and without a subject, maybe not so easy. Okay, if you put your hand up and block out the entire right hand of this image and just have those waves and the stormy waves and the clouds, you know, it's still interesting-ish, but I don't believe it's as relatable without that subject there. Okay, composition. Okay, so what I want to highlight here is by including a main subject, composition becomes easier. Okay, much easier. Look at this image here. We've got this big, bold subject. Now, there's only a couple of places you can place this subject, and it will look, and again, the composition's been a little bit cropped here for the format of this slideshow, but it's reasonably close. It's a little bit wider. But composition becomes easier because a big, bold subject like that can only go in a few locations. Like it can go, you know, I've got the horizon on the rule of thirds, which is quite a, you know, reasonable position to have that. You could also have the horizon potentially maybe in the middle or the top third, which is probably not going to work because the subject will go out the top of the frame. So we can rule that out straight away. Top third's probably not going to work unless we flip into, I don't know, maybe portrait mode or something. And then, you know, if I move the image to the middle, that could work too. But is the image going to be balanced? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I can't remember what's on the right-hand side. Or I could place the image on the far left. So there's really only about three or maybe 6 spots. You know, 3 spots with the horizon in its current position, and left, center, and right with the horizon on middle. Excuse me. Are only really the 3 spots where we could place that and have that looking compositionally okay. And I can even rule out the left side, because when you place a subject that's side lit, having the side that's lit up being cramped up by the edge of the frame is usually a no-no as well. You usually want the shadow side being cramped up by the frame. See how the shadow is facing the tight side, the light side is facing the open side. If you're going to do a kind of offset composition like this, you generally want the light side pointing into the open space. Whilst we're on this, and I think we're going to also touch on this in the next part of this presentation in a couple of weeks' time, But I mentioned balance, compositional balance is important, and we've got a big main subject here. You imagine if you placed a line, well, let's call the horizon. Let's imagine the horizon is a seesaw. So we place a point in the middle of the seesaw, the pivot point right in the middle of the seesaw. Everyone's had to go on a seesaw before. So the pivot point would be just off the left, just on the horizon, probably where the subject intersects the horizon on the left. And balance means that you have an equal amount of weight either side of the compositional seesaw. Okay, so we've got the big triangular shape there, balanced by the slightly smaller elements on the left there. However, the reason they balance nicely, in my opinion, is because we know how a seesaw works. If you've got someone little out on one end, then the big person either weighs the seesaw right down or needs to move up closer to the center to make the seesaw balanced or the image balanced. So we've got the big element closer to the middle, little element closer to the edge equals compositional balance. At least that's my theory anyway. Moving along, last one of the 4-point formula, simplicity. Okay, and again, we're going to break this down into a couple of points here. So keep it simple, fewer words tell a more powerful story. How many spelling mistakes have I had? I bet you I've had a few. I'm pretty hopeless at spelling. Distractions, gain attention, hold attention. So our job is to gain attention and hold attention. And then I've got another little competition theory for you called the thumbnail theory. It's a bit of a left of center theory, but we'll take a look at it anyway. Okay, so simplicity, keep it simple. Okay, so this image here, it's got 3 elements: sky, clay pan, old car. Okay, and it's also one of my favorites. I really like it. The reason I've brought it up as an example image here, it's a composite. Again, you just assume that most of mine are. The clay pan was taken out near Broken Hill somewhere. The car is from Silverton. I'm sure those that have been to Silverton have seen this car. It's a beauty out near one of the ruined houses out there, one of the sandstone ruins. It's out right next door. Beautiful car. And then the sky, well, you can go and shoot a blue sky on any old day in your front yard. So that's pretty straightforward. But the point that I wanted to bring up is on the original foreground, so the clay pan, there's this little line of green trees right on the horizon. Okay, a little line of green trees. And basically what I want to point out is that those green trees are not in line with the story that I was trying to tell. So I was trying to tell this kind of barren, parched, dry, barren land, desolate, all these things, and the car suits that, an old ruined car. What's it doing out there on this clay pan? Did it break down and it's just been left to rust? And it's got this gorgeous patina, and the clay pan is kind of matching that patina. It's all old and rusty and sort of worn out, both of the elements are. But having green trees suggesting that there was, better days on the horizon, if you like, or that there was water, or, that the clay pan didn't go on forever. I wanted the clay pan to go on and on and on forever. Like it was this huge valley of, ruin and dry and harshness. So leaving the trees in, it's not telling the story. So if there's an element in your image that's not directly helping to tell the story, frame it out in composition, crop it out in Photoshop, or remove it. Do everything you can to remove it, because number one, less elements in an image is a stronger image most of the time. The less you have in there, the stronger the image will probably be, to a certain degree. If you just take a picture of a white wall, it might not be all that strong, but 3 elements, I would say 3 or 4 or 5 if you can. Rule of thumb again, not always my theory, but not always what I stick to, especially not with the latest romantic style. They're much more grander and complex, but anyway, that's another story. But if it's not directly helping to tell the story, do your best to get it out of there. Again, we've got a double up here, but Simplicity, remove distractions. Again, basically on the same thing. I shot this down at the Perth boat shed on a rainy day. The reason I did that is because at the time, this was years ago, I wasn't all that good at Photoshop. And I was kind of hoping the rain was going to diffuse the background, or yeah, well, basically, yeah, just diffuse the background so that I could no longer see the other side of the river, because this is in the river by Perth there. I'm not sure, it might be the Swan River, don't quote me on that. I think it is. So there's boat sheds and jetties and whatnot on the other side. Now the left-hand side of the image, I managed to do that completely. The rain completely blocked out all the detail on the left-hand side, but on the right-hand side there's a little yacht club that's a little closer to me, and the rain didn't quite diffuse that. So I went and removed that quite simply, just duplicated the left side of the image and flipped it over to the right, and then mucked around with the shading a little bit to kind of camouflage that in a bit, if you like. Okay, so again, having this image for me is all about isolation, loneliness, these kind of depressing emotions again. Probably everyone's going to have to go home and yeah, I'm not sure, but I hope I haven't depressed everyone by telling my story. That's certainly not my opinion, not my intention. But anyway, maybe you'll find it enlightening and uplifting. That would be a better outcome. But yeah, the boat sheds were, I mean, sorry, the yacht club was not part of the original story for this image. So get rid of it, remove it, or crop it out, frame it out, or do whatever you can. Shoot in the rain if you have to. Okay, and I think we're getting close to the end here, guys. So again, thanks for having me. A couple more things I'll just run through here. This is the thumbnail theory, and it's one of my competition theories, and it kind of suits the formula. So the images, so if you're working on an image or considering it for a competition, and I only use this for a competition sense, and it doesn't always work. Don't use this as a be-all and end-all solution, but it can give you an idea of whether or not your image is kind of fitting the theory of light, simplicity, subject, and story. If it looks good in a thumbnail, it generally means that, you know, it's simplistic and has great light and has great tones and great colors. Okay, so if you see an image that size and you think, oh wow, that looks a bit interesting, I want to click on that, you might not be thinking that, but let's click on it, and there's the image there. Okay, so again, subject, light, simplicity, story, if you like. A lot of people see a wreck of the Titanic here. At least a lot of people see kind of a ghost ship wreck here. It's actually the corner of North Curl Pool, been mirror flipped to imitate the bow of a boat, so a concrete boat there. What else have we got to talk about? Oh, just wrapping it up. Okay, so as I said, the formula for interesting, in my opinion, is great light, tell a story, you know, have an emotive story if possible, or tell a story of types. Include a strong subject if you can, and keep it simplistic, as simple as possible. Don't have any distractions. Don't include any elements that are not directly helping to tell your story. I mean, here we go again. We've got a nice clay pan here. We've got an old tree, the old weathered house, and this big old stormy sky there. And for me, this image, I'm not sure if you guys will. Yeah, so Grant says, and this is a cool tip, the navigator window in Lightroom is great for testing and adjusting with the thumbnail theory. That's an excellent tip. So if it looks good in the navigator window, it might be a possible competition image. Could be a possible competition image. So this image here, I'm not sure if you can grab the story here. I mean, you might see a real literal story of outback, again, dry desert, but the drought is breaking, the rains are coming, these kind of things. So that's one story. I've got another story as well, a story of soulmates. Two friends spending a life together, both growing old together. You know, we've got this old tree. Yeah, maybe it's seen better days, but so's the house. The house was, you know, maybe the tree and the house were both you know, beautiful. The tree was green, and when the house was all sparkly and painted. And they've grown old together, and they're still standing strong together. And it looks like to me they're going to be standing strong for a lot longer to come yet. Nothing certainly that this storm is going to change, except maybe bring a bit of rain there. But yeah, story of soulmates sticking together, growing old together. And you can see that age, beauty in the age and the textures of that age there. Moving along. So feel free, if you've got any questions, fire them away now, because we're wrapping it up. We're going to wrap it up. In the next, in part 2 of this series, we're going to look at the building blocks of interesting. So in about 2-3 weeks, I'd say 3 weeks, we're going to look at part 2, and it's really interesting. Even maybe, although that first part is rather powerful, I believe, in highlighting some what can be kind of looked at as rather obvious elements, but until you kind of lay them out, they certainly weren't obvious to me until I went through and laid them out and went, oh wow, that's, yeah, I should have picked up on that previously. But in part 2, we're going to look at the building blocks of interesting. So the role and the different types of contrast that we can include in our photographs. So we've got conceptual contrast, which is kind of interesting. So that can be kind of different stories conflicting. You can have color contrast, and we can have the standard tonal contrast. So we're going to look right at contrast, because I believe contrast is one of the most interesting elements within photography. We're going to look at symmetry. Symmetry is one of the most attractive elements in photography, and if we cast our mind back to that concrete boat from Curl Curl Pool, extremely symmetrical in its shapes. We're going to look at shapes and lines and their impact within photography. Okay, so all this good stuff, the kind of triggers that you should be looking for when you're walking around, the kind of things you should be looking for to add to your image once you've got, you know, that subject and that simplicity and these kind of things. Okay, so that's the first thing you should be looking for, is strong subject, great light, simplicity and story. And then you can kind of mix and match in some of these things to make it even more interesting. S-curves are particularly interesting in photography. Another interesting element in photography is S-curves. A little theory I call LCC. We'll keep that one under wraps, but I'm going to run through exactly what LCC is and how it can make your photos more powerful and more interesting. We're going to look more deeply into color and its connection with interesting photography, and also its connection with emotion and emotive images. Okay, so that's it. That's it for me. Any questions popping up there? Okay, we've got a couple of thank yous. Okay, it doesn't look like it. No more questions. Guys, thank you so much for dropping in and spending some time with me. I'm not sure how long I've rambled on for, maybe an hour or so. But yeah, thanks for dropping in, and stay tuned. Obviously check out Easy Way Photography on Facebook, because I'll be posting there for the next live event. If you're on my email list, you can also get early notification of the live events. Jump over to my website, australianphotographer.com, and you'll get a pop-up within a couple of seconds, and you can sign up to my email list over there and get advanced notification. Also remember, Easy Way Photography. In fact, last slide, I forgot to sell my easywayphotography.com. Transform the ordinary into extraordinary. That's the kind of thing that I teach the students over at Easy Way Photography, to transform those ordinary raw files into extraordinary works of art. So once again, thanks for dropping by. I really appreciate you guys watching along. The link will be live. You'll be able to watch the replay whenever you like if you want to put yourself through that again. And I will see you next time. Thanks again. Bye for now.